Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. My name is Whitney Stewart. I am the Director of Clinical Project Management at Curebase. I've been in clinical operations for about 10 years, and specifically in decentralized trial operations for about 6. And at Curebase, I have been fortunate enough to be the project director overseeing a number of digital therapeutic studies. So I'm very excited to kind of take my learnings and come here to talk to you about conducting quality-driven trials for digital therapeutics. And specifically, and the more interesting part of the talk will be about some of the challenges I've seen in conducting these trials and how you can plan from a quality perspective to avoid them. I wanted to start off with the idea of quality by design, which is actually a concept I think typically used in product development, which since you're in product development, you might be familiar with it. And really that means building quality into your processes. And here I make the statement that quality requires clear vision. And that's to be distinguished from a clear vision because it's not always possible to see all the potential issues and everything, all the puzzle pieces, right, that come into conducting a clinical trial. But if you have, a quality lens, then you have the ability to kind of pivot and address issues as they come up, which is really important. And for this talk, I'm really going to focus on 3 puzzle pieces. It's going to be regulations, vendors, specifically vendor selection, and then plans. So a little bit about those challenges and how you can plan to have a high quality trial. So let's start with key regulations, and I'm not going to focus too much on regulations, but it's important to talk about regulations when you talk about quality. And I've divided this section into 2 parts. So a little bit about regulations specific to medical devices, and then regulations specific to conducting clinical trials. So if we look at the regulations specific to medical devices, the Code of Federal Regulations has a lot of information there, right? So there's parts 800 through 898 that may apply. And to be frank, I am not the subject matter expert on regulations that apply only to medical devices because these are not particularly relevant for conducting clinical trials. And one resource that I find very helpful is on the Digital Therapeutic Alliance website, and I put the link here, and they kind of outline things you need to pay attention to in terms of general controls and then special controls depending on your classification and your pathway. And they call out these particular parts: Part 807, your medical device listing; Part 820, quality system regulation; and then Part 801, labeling requirements. So like I said, not particularly relevant to conducting trials, but I think the plug here is that, even if you conduct a good trial and you have sound clinical evidence, if you're not abiding by the other regulations for medical devices, you won't get very far. So, and just a little information about the regulatory process and recommendations for interacting with the FDA here. You have 2 paths you could take, right? So you can submit a 513G, which will confirm your regulatory pathway. A good idea, since there is a still lack of clarity on terms of which pathway to take, and it just, will provide some confirmation, which is helpful and could determine kind of what level of evidence or what kind of trials you're conducting. And then the other one is to do a pre-submission, and that allows you to actually ask the FDA specific questions and could give you some really helpful feedback for your trial design. It could, affect how you're conducting your trial to get that clinical evidence. And both of these are optional, but like I said, highly recommended. If it just takes a little bit of planning and a little bit of time and a little bit of money in some case, but always a good idea to kind of engage with the FDA to help you be successful. Now let's talk about regulations for conducting clinical trials in the United States. So again, the Code of Federal Regulations has a lot of requirements and information. Right here, I call out Part 50, protection of human subjects, and that's really the first thing that people conducting trials will be trained on. So like this is relevant for sites and the people actually executing on the trial. Part 11 has to do with electronic records, electronic signatures. So if you're doing e-consent, if you have e-source, super relevant to understand Part 11. And then in the Code of Federal Regulations, there's a lot of information about regulatory obligations for sponsors, for IRBs, for investigators. As part of the process of conducting research, you're likely to actually somewhat transfer obligations to, say, a vendor, a clinical research organization, but you should always be familiar with your own obligations to make sure you're meeting those, as well as the obligations of really all the players that are conducting research for you, just so you can keep an eye and oversee that. And then there's good clinical practice. So this is really the epitome of regulations for conducting trials. It outlines a number of important elements such as, informed consent, even like protocol design and making sure it's scientifically sound. You have record keeping, quality components. So it really is an excellent resource and the center of like kind of conducting clinical research. And the main regulation there is ICH E6R2. And ISO 14155 is actually the same content as ICH, but just written for medical devices. So perhaps because we're looking at medical devices here, you'll come across that regulation itself. Usually what I've seen in my experience is that people are certified in GCP and ICH it's specifically, and maybe not in ISO 14155, and that's usually fine, again, because it's the same content, but you might see ISO 14155 if you're working with sites or vendors that have a lot of medical device experience. That's it. So that's all I'm going to talk about regulations. Next up is vendor selection. So vendors are a really pivotal part of conducting research. And unless you have everything in-house, including, data collection abilities and all the staff to conduct the trials, you're looking at needing some vendors. And they can really support you in your journey and help you, conduct it in a quality manner, or they could potentially be kind of a roadblock. What major vendors will you need for trials in this space? First, I see your clinical research organization. That entity is going to do things such as general project management, clinical monitoring, data management, maybe biostats, and maybe you'll have some of these capabilities in-house, and so you'll just kind of pick and choose what functions you need, but more than likely you're going to need a CRO on your team. Next is data collection technology. So these are going to be the technologies that you're actually putting the data into from the sites to make it to you. So you could have one data source. You think of your electronic data capture, EDC. You could have another one if you have a separate, patient-reported outcome collection mechanism. But regardless, you're probably going to have at least one data collection technology. And then, because a lot of digital therapeutic studies are being conducted decentralized, you may want to have an actual decentralized trial vendor, and those will be people that have the SOPs in place, the infrastructure for conducting these types of trials, and actually have the staff to conduct them and the knowledge to conduct them in a quality manner. So next up, let's talk a little bit about how you select the proper vendors. So I've divided it into 3 steps here. The first one being defining the requirements. So you really need to know what type of vendor, what type of services that you need, right? So how are you going to find the best fit vendor if you don't first decide and have a vision for what that vendor should look like? And this should get really detailed, right? And you may have requirements that come from a company level. I think of privacy or security requirements, and then it may be actually specific to your program or even your trial, right? So it could change with each time you conduct a trial. When you think of like a clinical research organization, maybe requirements will be around their experience. So therapeutic experience, do they have experience with your particular therapeutic area? Do you need them to have experience with that actual disease or condition? Is there something unique about that it's best to have somebody with experience there? Do they need to have experience conducting decentralized trials, or do you actually want them to have experience with conducting digital therapeutic trials, right? So things like that. And for your electronic data capture system, maybe you need them to have e-consent. You need them to have telemedicine. Maybe for one of the assessments on your trial, it's actually a patient-reported outcome that's a bit unique, and so they need to be able to build that. And you could think of, I don't know, data monitoring. Do you need to have querying within the system? Do you need to have source data verification? So a lot of details that you can pick out in terms of that vendor as well. Now, once you've done your homework and put the effort into actually defining the requirements, you'll move on to step 2, which is the actual request for information, request for proposal, and engagement with these vendors. So first up is a kind of usually a smaller questionnaire or something where you're just gathering information. Maybe you have a longer list of vendors and you need to kind of knock some off when they're not a good fit. And so it's kind of a quicker way to narrow your list down. And then you'll engage a few vendors for an actual proposal. And that is when your vendor will take your requirements that you share with them, your protocol, and actually build out a proposal for how they'll meet those requirements, what kind of services they can offer to help you conduct your trial. And they'll get into the details of their services, and you can kind of then, adjust and reflect that in your requirements. And then likely you'll go to a bid defense, which is actually an opportunity to talk to the vendor team. You'll bring your team, and your team members can ask a number of questions and review the proposal and review the details to make sure they fully understand the capabilities of the vendor. Again, always coming back to those requirements and noting down what they meet, what they don't meet, what are must-haves, what are nice-to-haves types of thing. Now, you'll have your kind of preferred vendor likely coming out of this process, and you could move directly to contracting, or what I actually recommend would be step 3, which is a qualification audit. And that is where you send someone in to actually audit the processes, the SOPs of your vendor, kind of looking under the hood, right, to make sure, what they actually propose to you is like what is actually going on when they're going to execute on your study. It's an opportunity also for you to ask for some changes. Say, they don't meet all of your requirements, but it's a quick fix to kind of adjust their processes or build something into their processes. You can request that. More than likely, they'll try to meet it, and then you're set up for success, really. Okay, that's all I'm going to talk about vendors. Like I said, really important to put the effort in up front to select the proper vendors. Now let's get into some of the challenges that I've seen, that Curebase has seen in conducting digital therapeutic studies. I've broken it down into kind of 3 different areas. So the first one is use of technology, the second one is remote data collection, and the third one is participant recruitment. So area 1, use of technology. So when you're conducting a trial, you're having your participants use your digital therapeutic, right? That is a technology. And more than likely at this point, I'm kind of thinking of, further down the development phases where you're on your, getting your pivotal evidence, that you've done the usability tests and you have optimized the workflows, right? But more likely than not, people are going to have questions about, how to use your technology. And now with the clinical trial, you're also introducing kind of data collection through another software. Like I said, maybe they're going to have to do e-consent, or they're going to have to join telemedicine visits, or they're going to have to submit patient-reported outcomes. So they could have questions related to that technology as well. And so what we've seen as the true challenge is actually providing sufficient support for these participants in the use of technology itself. So you have three players really in the clinical trial game. In digital therapeutic studies, you have your digital therapeutic team, you have your software team where the data is being collected, and then you have your clinical trial team, so your coordinator, which is really the main center point. So who answers what question? Where does the participant go to ask the questions to get the support they need in a timely manner? And one thing we note, and it's fairly obvious, but you need to have a clear support plan, right? So you need to understand yourself, and your vendors need to understand like who can answer what types of questions, and make sure the people that are answering those questions have the information they need. And you also have to consider blinding in this part. So say your clinical research coordinators or any of your staff aren't supposed to know which trial arm the participant is assigned to, then that participant cannot go to them with any questions related to your digital therapeutic, right? So in theory, your digital therapeutic will have their support team, and then your software will have their support team, and you need to tell the participant repeatedly, like, don't tell your coordinator what arm you're on. Please, if you have questions with your actual therapeutic, please go to this entity, one of the other entities. So it's really important to just really outline that and make sure everyone's clear, including the participant. Now, another issue that we've seen is kind of providing sufficient resourcing. So one thing that can lead to a quality issue is not resolving these tech questions and these tech issues in a timely manner. It can lead to protocol deviations, it can lead to missing data. And so you need to make sure that these questions are getting answered quickly. And perhaps on your team, on your digital therapeutic team, the turnaround is typically, 48 hours, and that may not be sufficient for turnaround time when conducting a trial. So maybe you need to actually build in resources specifically for the trial to answer these questions more timely. The same for your software that you're working with. It's just really important to think of resourcing, because you may be surprised with how many questions that come in and kind of how that can derail your study if they're not getting answered. And then finally, you need to think about adequate training. And that is both for the participant, right? Again, they're using all sorts of technologies and engaging with different teams, but also for your site staff. And it's sometimes hard for site staff to learn and fully understand deeply, like how the digital therapeutic works or how the software works. And if they're engaging with participants real time, and they're trying to troubleshoot, how to get onto a telemedicine call, or, how to get to the next session in the digital therapeutic, then that can really derail the participant experience, lead to like retention issues, again, lead to missing data, protocol deviations, all sorts of quality concerns. So make sure you adequately train your staff. The next area of challenges is related to remote data collection. And we are really in an exciting time for data. There's a lot of data available, and it's easier than ever to, build that into your trial and collect that data. But with kind of remote data collection and having participants, submit data at a distance, you introduce some unique challenges. So what we've seen are challenges with keeping participants on track for their data submission. So in these trials, you actually have your participants on two different schedules. So you have your digital therapeutics regimen, right? And they're doing sessions or engaging with that product on one schedule. And then you actually have your schedule of assessments related to your protocol. And they are, submitting data on a different schedule. So really, how do they know what to do, where to do it, and when to do it? Additionally, you do have a lot of automated workflows in these type of studies. So there's not a lot of engagement with the trial team up front, maybe even throughout. And you need to make sure that you're retaining these participants, that they're engaged in the trial process itself. So at Curebase, what we do is we develop this participant communication plan. And we've learned that it's a really, really important plan to create and spend a lot of time on when you're thinking about a trial and communications. So this involves everything the participant will see as a part of their journey. So it starts with, the landing page and where they get the initial information about the study. It includes, that email they get when they're potentially eligible, to the reminder that they have a telemedicine visit or that a new assessment is available to them. So it really covers the whole experience. And like I said, there's a lot of automated workflows, and so all of these touch points and the communication that you're providing, the information, it's super pivotal for making sure that they're submitting data when they should, on what kind of device that they should be submitting it on. And as a company that does a lot of trials, so we do have some best practices and some recommendations, but it's actually ended up being kind of a very personal, protocol specific document and journey for these participants. And so it's a lot of effort up front, and then more than likely you're going to have some iterations on it. And so just a really important document and kind of just general concept around conducting clinical trials. Next up, I want to talk a little bit about data monitoring. Just as a concept, obviously when you have remote data collection and you are, getting this data real time, you want to know what's happening. You want to make sure it's coming in. You want to make sure it's of high quality. And I like to focus on a period of the trial known as the recruitment period, right? Where you're having new participants come in. And more often than not, all of your study team members are really focused. I mean, I would even say even blinded to that first part of the funnel and optimizing that and focusing on that and making sure you're hitting your recruitment numbers, because that's very important. Obviously, without participants, you're not going to have data. But the point I make there is that maybe while you're getting your last few participants into the trial, that there's actually those first participants that are hitting your next visits, that they're submitting, data important for your endpoints at the subsequent visits. And if you're not really paying attention to that or have visibility into that, you could have major issues from a quality perspective for, again, protocol deviations, missing data, all sorts of things. So my advice here is to have a clear data monitoring strategy and make sure you have access to the data that's both within your digital therapeutic to make sure they're doing what they need to do from that end, as well as on the trial, the data being submitted, that it's high quality. Your clinical research associates, your CRAs, are going to be looking at the data at regular frequencies, but it's really the in-between, right? Before they identify those issues, that you want to be really proactive and make sure that the data is there. Okay, the next challenge, and really the final challenge I want to talk about, is related to participant recruitment. And like I said on that last slide, it's really, really an important part of a study because you need participants to have data, right? And so for this example, I want to focus on decentralized trials. And I want to do that because, as I mentioned previously, a lot of digital therapeutic studies are conducted as a DCT. It's really a good fit, but with that comes a lot of kind of unique challenges. And you think of the efficiencies that it offers, kind of breaking down those geographical barriers and really opening up recruitment to a lot of numbers. But there's some key considerations when you think of a legal perspective, a quality perspective, and even kind of an ethical perspective. What we've seen in this area are challenges aligning on the appropriate recruitment strategy when conducting a decentralized digital therapeutic study. And the first question you ask yourself is like, okay, if I'm not limited to where my site is, where my investigator is, like the traditional model, where can I recruit from? And a key consideration is the investigator licensure, right? And so you have to figure out if you need to have an investigator that is licensed in each state that a participant comes from or not. And one of the questions you can ask is there any reason that the investigator needs to provide kind of medical intervention or medical oversight on this trial? And perhaps you have in your digital therapeutics super automated workflows, and in your protocol, the assessments are all, maybe they're all mostly patient reported outcomes, or the data can be collected by clinical research coordinators and don't actually require that medical input or oversight. And then you're looking like it's a possible kind of no, that I don't need investigator licensure. Another question that you can ask is the participant ever going to claim that there is a patient-doctor relationship? So are they interacting with the investigator frequently? Are they going to feel like they're actually having a relationship with this investigator, which is another issue when it comes to licensure. So the recommendation here is to really check with your subject matter experts, right? So you're going to check with your investigator. They're going to look at the protocol and what you're asking them to do, and they're going to determine if they think it requires their medical oversight. You're going to talk to likely a lawyer, right? So it's actually a legal thing. Licensing is a legal process, and they're going to have a perspective on if there's any issues there. You're going to talk to your quality team, right? So you're going to build all these processes around a decentralized trial, and they're going to have good input into if those processes are, producing the highest quality outputs. And then you're probably going to talk to your decentralized trial vendor, right? Because they're going to have a lot of experience, and they're going to have examples that they can pull from to tell you if it's a good idea to go fully decentralized, kind of opening up that recruitment, or to kind of stick within licensure. Another important consideration is safety. So, that is the priority when conducting trials, is ensuring these participants are safe. And so maybe, your digital therapeutic, very low risk, super automated, very safe. Maybe your trial assessments, there's no real issues there, but you have to also think about the patient population. So for example, if you are conducting research in a population that has anxiety or depression, and they're likely to, have suicidal ideation while on the study, is that a concern? Like, what are the procedures in place to get them the support they need? Is it going to require your investigator to actually intervene, interact with them, and provide medical oversight? If not, maybe you have a plan where they are, fully supported from a different perspective. Maybe you are doing a patient safety plan and you get information about their treating physician, and you have maybe emergency contacts that you can engage if they ever indicate that they're suicidal. So the plug here is to actually develop a safety plan, no matter what the scenario, right? So safety plans are pretty common on clinical trials. Safety reporting, super important, and it's just a different look at it when you're thinking of these very low risk devices and kind of low risk studies that aren't expecting to have a lot of adverse events, but it's really about overall safety. And if you're going to put barriers up to what your investigators can do, you need to make sure to kind of cover the other side of that line with proper procedures and a proper plan. Now, from an overall perspective, say you then decide you're recruiting from everywhere, you can hit all 50 states, and it's very exciting. That's quite a population to recruit from. But what does that process look like? So you're putting a link out on the internet, and you're You're having people click on it. They're going to answer a few questions. They're going to be selected to be, potentially eligible. They're going to consent. Maybe it's all automated. How do you confirm that this participant is who they say they are, and particularly that they are fit to contribute data to your study, right? That they actually have the condition that you are studying. And so you have to think about fraud prevention. And this is pretty unique for decentralized trials, just because of the nature of interacting with these participants. Some things to consider are, what are the requirements to get into your study? Maybe at some point you actually need to confirm their diagnosis, and so you're going to collect medical records. That's a good way to kind of confirm someone's identity. Maybe, it's all the way automated to the step of onboarding them onto the digital therapeutic or the control. So maybe you insert a identity verification step at that point where they, show their ID and confirm with research site staff that they are who they say they are. And maybe there's options to actually do technology checks through your software provider. Maybe they can actually not allow anyone who's not in the US to sign up, things like that. So just an important thing to consider and think about from a risk perspective when you kind of go the DCT route. All right, so those are the kind of 3 rounds of challenges that I'm going to talk about, and the key takeaways here I think are relatively obvious. Know the regulations, know both the regulations for your device and the regulations for conducting trials. That's the best way to guarantee that you are fitting within those regulations and that you are conducting a high quality trial. Choose the right partners, right? So make sure you put the effort in to define what you need in your vendors and go through that kind of rigorous selection process to set yourself up for success. And then plan ahead. So, put the effort in up front to put some plans, build quality into the process and into those plans so that you can prevent some of the issues that are expected. And then you have kind of the bandwidth and the wiggle room to adjust as new issues appear, which in clinical research, they inevitably do. All right, that is all I have. Thank you so much for joining. Again, Whitney, you can reach out to me at whitney@curebase.com. Here is a QR code for a case study if you are interested, and it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you learned something.